not nervous. This is called excitement. And I am honored to bring the word to you. I'm honored to stand here in front of you. I'm privileged that you guys would y'all know me, I know most of you, and I'm just privileged that y'all trust and receive and hear the word that I feel like even God gives us from this platform for your lives. So I'm honored to stand here in front of you. I'm honored that Pastor Sherwood would honor me with this time to be able to do this. I'm about to tell a little bit of a story on him. He was talking about this service, the 29th, and I was like, well, I'll preach and I'll speak it, and I think that I've got something to say, and I thought I had something to say. And at the end of that statement, he looked at me and said, well, this service is like Malachi, right before the Old Testament ends, when everything is the most important, and he had the words to leave with an entire 400 years before the next thing comes. He was like, so what are you going to say? I was like, Pastor Sherwood, I was nervous to say I would speak, and now you have ruined it. Like, I don't know what to say now. And so, in talking about that and thinking about that, I just decided, well, why not talk about Malachi? Because if he had something that important to say at the end of an era, maybe he's got something else to say to us today. So, I want to talk about Malachi this morning. What I really want to talk about is the message of hope for our lives. I think there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different things that you could take from the book of Malachi. This is not the book of Malachi. There's a lot of things that you could kind of take from the story as is and as you read it. But if you really read the book of Malachi, I think that it has some really important things for us as we end seasons and launch new seasons, as we're believing for words that we haven't seen come to pass yet. And Malachi has a lot of insight on what God's doing, and not just that, what we should do in the meantime during believing and praying that things are going to come to pass that God has said to us, or that we're believing God's going to do, or that he's going to move. And so in Malachi, just to give you a preface on it, it's after Israel has been dismissed from Babylon. So it's been 100 years since the exit from Babylon captivity for Israel. And so they've come out of it, and there's really 6 or 7 different conversations going on in the book of Malachi. Just to tell you real quick, there's several different arguments. So if you start to read Malachi and you get through it, you realize God's like picking a fight with Israel. And it's because they're doing all of these things. It's been 100 years since God moved them out of captivity, since God rescued them, since God saved them. And they've reached a place where time has passed so long that life has become so circumstantial that they're like, did God really provide rescue? Did that really happen 100 years ago? Did that really affect our family? And they begin to question all of these things that God did, which makes them question all the things that they believe and have been told God's going to do. And so one of the first things in Malachi that it begins to talk about is it begins to talk about how God starts to pick a fight with Israel because he's trying to expose their doubting and their suspiciousness. So they've doubted what he's done before, which made them suspicious that he's even done anything in the past and that he's going to do anything in the future. And so that was really the first thing. And the second thing is he has a problem with them because they start not to take the temple has been built back at this point. They start to not take the things of God seriously. So they start to make light of God and the temple and services and honoring God and things that the word says that you should do when you love God and when you honor God and to be a Christian. They start to make light of all of those things because they're living in doubt that he really ever came through in the past. And because of that, they're not sure if he'll really ever come through in the future. And so on top of all those things, they start to doubt, which makes them start to make God super casual. And so Malachi, the story of Malachi comes in for God. God is saying pretty much, no, I still love you. I'm trying to tell you, I still love you, Israel, and I'm just exposing that you're believing and thinking of these things, and because you're believing and thinking this way, you are being confused and blinded by the fact that I still really love you. So then, just like we just sung 2 songs and they talked about remembrance. Caleb's song talked about remembrance. Mr. Jimmy spoke at the end about remembering the things God has done, even when it feels like that you haven't received or haven't been heard or haven't found the answers, and God starts to remind them of what he has already done. He starts to remind them of the story of Jacob and Esau, and he starts to remind them of the deliverance from captivity. So all this stuff's going on, and in the meantime, even though God is trying to show them from the past that he's going to take care of their future, they're living in doubt. And so it says, then they begin to turn against God, which then made them turn against each other and most of their wives. So the men start to go crazy, leaving their wives, doing all kind of other things. And then it says this, they turn at that point to sin. And when they turn to sin, they look back at God and say, we turn to sin because you've neglected us, because you have never come through, because the stories that we've been told haven't actually happened, because you may have done something for granddaddy, but you forgot about me. And so they blame God for neglect at this point. And then when they start blaming God for neglect, they pull away from even the actions of attending and giving. So then Malachi begins to talk about the tithe and what you give to the house of God, and you're attending the house of God and coming to the temple and giving sacrifices. So then it says they even move away from all of that. And they say this is how Malachi really ends until what we're going to read at the very end. And it says, people ended up saying it is pointless to serve God because wicked people succeed and God does nothing to them. So they've ended up in doubt and suspicion after they have been delivered from Babylon captivity. And we end up right in the middle of Malachi, and all of these things are happening. Now, Malachi is important because Malachi is the word that comes to Israel in the midst of their doubt and suspicion. So there was a faithful people that were there. There was some people that still remembered God, that remained faithful. And because of the believers that still loved God, that still remained faithful, God sends Malachi. What does Malachi actually mean? It means a messenger or my angel. Strange, I know. It means that he could send an angel to you personally. Or I like this translation of it. I looked up several different forms, and it means a messenger of ascension. Now, what that means is, to me, when I begin to study it, is that Malachi is the ultimate message of hope. Malachi is the ultimate message that has said Jesus has came in the past, and I am prophesying that Jesus is still coming in the future. That it doesn't matter what you believe, where you've been, what's going on in your life, that Malachi is the messenger that is raised up that says, remember the word, and the word is still coming. Malachi begins to talk at the end of this about the second coming of Jesus. Wow. Second coming of Jesus. Second coming of Jesus. He starts to talk at the end of this, and he starts talking about the second coming of Jesus. And what he's really saying is, stop what you're thinking. Stop being suspicious of the future. Stop doubting the past. And I want you to remember the word that God is still coming. So what's really going on in the power of Malachi and the great message of hope, I would consider this the message of hope. Not a message, the message. Because in the middle of everything that you're going through, in the middle of not seeing the fruit of your labor, in the middle of not receiving the reward yet, Malachi is the ultimate message to remind you of the message that you are not wrong. He is still coming. Do not forget it. The answer is still on its way. Don't stop doing what you're doing, because what you have heard, what you have believed, what you have been told, what you have received in prayer and in your labors, it is still coming to pass. So for me, in the middle of processes or in the middle of preparations, Malachi's message is the greatest message of hope, because when you received something or a word, or you're believing something, or you've prayed for 5 years, and as soon as you start to grow doubtful about the fact that what you're doing or saying or believing is even real, Malachi is the word that comes up that says, no, you have hope. Don't let go. Don't stop. Don't stop believing. Keep moving. Keep going. God is not done yet. There is more to come. And so Malachi, I think, is the ultimate message of hope. Ephesians 2:10 says this. Let me turn to it. It says that he has delivered us from sin, and he has opened a door for us. And Ephesians 2 begins to talk about this. It says that now that God has come, and now that through Jesus we are now in Christ, now we have the ability to be seated with Christ in heavenly places. So I only mention that because of this. Sometimes in your life, you feel like that you can no longer believe in or see the future or see the ending or gain sight of a promise that you once felt like you received from God. And sometimes you get lost in the circumstances of life. You become suspicious of the future, and then you doubt what God is saying. And sometimes you need a message of ascension to be lifted up and seated above the circumstances, to see for a moment God is still going to do what he's going to do. That I am still going to reach this point in my life. That when God brings you up to see things from a heavenly place and another level, then you can say, oh my gosh, there is a future. There is this thing coming. There is this thing happening. And then you receive hope for believing even further. That is what Malachi really means. Malachi is a representation that there is always hope that he is coming. And it is a reminder. It's not just the message. This is for believers that have already received the message. They already received a promise. They're already believing for something. They're already moving towards something. This is the reminder that don't lose faith in the middle. Don't give up where you're at because you're not where you feel like you're supposed to be. Don't discount what God's doing. And then Malachi, and God through Malachi begins to teach people what to do in the meantime and in the process of not receiving yet what you feel like God has promised to you. And the ultimate message of hope comes to you that he's still coming. It doesn't matter what it looks like. God is still coming. The message of hope that God is still coming just means that he is in preparation. He is still preparing something for you that you're not yet ready to receive. So all you have to do is stay faithful to God and figure out what you need to do on the inside of you to make yourself ready to receive the things that he's preparing for you. And that's literally what he begins to do in Malachi. Instead of just giving them what they want, instead of sending them, he gives them encouragement to say, there is hope, I am still coming. And then he begins to point out the things in their life that he feels like, or that God knows needs to change to prepare them for what's really coming. So the message of hope, I'm going to turn to Malachi. I'm kind of going to lean in Malachi chapter 3, the entire thing. In chapter 1, verse 1, it talks about this was a word to Israel in the midst of doubt. And so that's what we're talking about, a word to us in the midst of doubt, that he has sent a message of hope in the midst of doubt. So in Malachi 3, chapter 1, it says this, behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. Now, if you flip over to Matthew 11, really, this is a prophecy about something that is to come. Malachi 3, verse 1 really is alluding to John the Baptist that's going to show up in Matthew. And when you get to Matthew chapter 11, the Bible introduces John the Baptist in preparing the way of the Lord, the one who will announce his coming. And then Matthew reverts back to this prophecy in Malachi to say, you who were there, God is still answering and God has come. And now the prophecy you received, the reminder of the word that you are preparing something to come, has now come alive again in John the Baptist. And now he is here to point that Jesus is here. So all of this is a painted picture of that Jesus is coming. And it's really what the whole Bible is really about. It's a continuing visual picture that you can hold on and you can believe the word, because whether it's 4 minutes or 400 years, he will not do what he said he's going to do. And even in John the Baptist, he will show you the way back to when he first said the word and say, now here I am, it has come. So what I want you to see or receive in going into 2025 is the greatest message of hope that I think Malachi was trying to give. That there is a reminder that what you're doing, while you're doing it, God is still doing something for you. That he has promised to come, that he has promised the future, that he has promised what you have prayed for, that he has seated and he is there. And all my goal is today to be like a Malachi, that it will just lift you up so that you could see there is a hope for everything that you believe is going to happen. There is a hope for everything that you prayed for. There is a hope for everything that you feel like God has set on the inside of you. So, verse 2 ends up saying this, Malachi 3 verse 2. Who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? Immediately, even in verse 2, he starts to again say, he is coming. He is coming. Can you just endure until his coming? Then he reminds us that he's just in preparation. And if you can wait and not grow weary, you will receive. I wrote this down even for myself. That he is declaring, if you're still in the he is coming, then he is still in the I am preparing. That's the only place you have arrived to. We get so lost in seasons of preparation because we haven't received the answer that we get suspicious and we get doubtful that God's doing what he said he's going to do, or the word we believed we received, or the moment we had at an altar, or what was going on with our children and the things we're believing for God to do. And we start to receive all this, and God is saying, I have not disappeared. I am just still piecing the puzzles together to make this ready for you to get here. So if you have not made it to he has come, then you're just still in he's preparing. So the message of Malachi is have hope. He is just preparing something greater. Have hope. He is just putting together pieces of something that is there for you. You just have to endure until he gets there. But the message is not you have to endure. The message is he's still coming. He's still coming. Just hold on. He's still coming. Just wait. He's still coming. The message of Malachi is the ultimate message of hope. I begin to think about this. Pastor CJ, who does so many things here, didn't mean to call him out. He had no idea. Pastor CJ is also a basketball coach here. And so we ended up in this game, and the game's pretty heated. We're only behind by a couple points at this point in the game, and Pastor CJ calls a timeout. And when he calls a timeout, he puts everybody on the bench, and he goes after it. He is like, what are y'all doing? God, you're not shooting the ball, blah, blah, blah. And so afterwards, we were actually in the back of the sanctuary, and I walked over here, and I said, Pastor CJ, when you're in moments like that, and you call a timeout in the heat of the moment, and really, they weren't that far behind, and things were we still had time on the clock, and we still had everything. I said, what is your goal? Like, what are you trying to do in your team in that moment? And he said this, that his goal is in that moment to pull them out of the emotion or the feeling of losing and pull them back into the reality of the game, because the reality of the game is they're only 4 points behind and they're still projected to win this game. But when they get in their feelings, when things aren't happening, when shots aren't falling, when things are not being completed, when they're trying to complete it and they're not being immediately rewarded for their actions, immediately, circumstantially, they're getting in their feelings and they start to move and play and deliver to the game failure because they already believe that they have reached a place of not winning, when the truth is they're so far from not winning. And so he said, my goal is to call them back into the reality of what's happening. And the reality of what's happening is you're not losing at all. You're not even close. We're 2 or 3 shots and 2 or 3 rundowns the courts. We're 1 fast break from being back in this game, and we're projected to win this game. When this team got here, we already were projected to win this game. And so I thought about that, and I thought, Malachi is talking to all of Israel who just haven't heard from God in a moment and aren't sure anymore what he's doing and haven't received the word yet. And Malachi is standing up to call a timeout, to pull them back in the corner and say, the reality still is that God is coming. The reality still is that he has already won. The reality is that he has already delivered us from exile, and he has already planned the future for our entire generation to be set free. And Jesus is coming. The ultimate answer to our lives is on its way. The message of Malachi is stop playing in the reality of your emotions and get back into the reality of the future God has given us. It is step into the real reality that we've already won. We've already won. Seasons of silence are nothing more than seasons of preparation. Seasons of wait are nothing more than seasons of preparation. So we cannot fall prey to the feelings of it's not working out when the reality is it already worked out. We're just trying to get there. So hear the word of hope today, that we've already won the war. The battle's already been won. There's already been something set up for your future. There's already been something set up for your children. That prayer actually works. That worship actually matters. That tithing actually matters. And it is doing nothing more than preparing you for what is promised to come. Promised to come. He begins to talk about this. I want to talk about, in the process, he begins to tell Malachi, check my time here. He begins to tell Malachi this. In chapter 3, he goes through all these things like don't rob God, don't disown your wives, get back into believing that God is going to come. Get back into believing that things are going to happen. And then it says this, I'm only using these 2 topics to highlight them. If you want to think about all the topics, read Malachi 3. I'm using these because these are some of my favorite things on earth. Complaining and comparison. Complaining and comparison, I like to use 2 different things. The reason we get so distracted and so doubtful and so lost in our emotions is because we begin to either A, complain that God's not doing what he said he's going to do, or B, compare like as if we were on a court in a basketball game and thought, well, they just scored 3 more points than we did, so they have to be better. And comparison shields you from the reality that you're still in the game and you're still going to win. And complaining shields you from the wisdom God has given you in previous processes. Complaining comes from offense. Offense hides the fact that you were giving any wisdom. You ever met those people that you're like, man, you lived a lot of life. Man, you should have so much wisdom to give. I saw you handle a situation 5 years ago and thought, oh my gosh. And then you talk to them and they sound like 13-year-olds. I'm like, where did your age go? Where did your wisdom go? And probably they complained about a season of life. Probably they got offended. And the reward of wisdom you got in former processes is shut off from you because of your complaining and offense. Most people drowned in their offense. Why? Because it's wrong to get offended? The Bible says not if you get offended. It says when you get offended. We're going to be offended. The thing is, you cannot stay in offense. You cannot remain in complaining. You can't live in comparison because it cuts off your your ear to the wisdom of heaven that is supposed to be leading you out of the place that you're in. So you drowned in those places. That's what's happening. So I like to say it like this. Ephesians talks about now we have a way to be seated in heaven with Christ. Malachi means a messenger of ascension. So literally we have a way to be seated above circumstances. We have a way to be given an angel or a messenger of ascension so that we could be seated above troubles, seated above circumstances, seated above problems, to see that there is still a promise even though we're still sitting in the problem. That we can see, oh, this is just preparation. This is not life is over. This is not God doesn't exist. This is nothing more than a moment of me getting an opportunity to trust him more that he's going to come through. So I like to call it shielded, not seated. The difference in them both, that you can be shielded from the promise, so then you grow weary and doubtful, or you can be seated in heavenly places and see the promise and remain faithful, and God will begin to reward you even in that season, and you won't lose the battle to circumstances and to life. So looking in their lives, even in chapter 3, and I'm going to start in verse 13. God says this, your words, God has feelings. God, you can do things that affect God. You really can. This is what he says. People are like, God, you're not there. We don't understand. Why have you neglected us? We can't see you. You're not here. And this is what God says. Your words have been harsh to me. I say, says the Lord. Yet you say, what have we spoken against you? They don't have a clue. They are completely shielded from the fact that they're running around on their wives and they stop paying their tithe and don't give a hoot about the temple anymore. All of these things going on that previously it says that they've been doing. And when he says you have hurt me, they go, how? What have we done against you? And then God goes to tell them. You have said, verse 14, you have said it is useless to serve God. What profit is it that we have kept his ordinances and that we have walked as mourners before the Lord of hosts? So now we call the proud blessed, for those who do wicked are raised up and even tempt God and then go free. Let me tell you something real fast. Comparison to other people is the dumbest thing you can do for your life. Comparison and then complaining, which is what they did, is the ultimate bubble to block out the fact that what really matters and what doesn't. And it's the difference from being shielded from God's promise or seated in a place where you can see God's promise. You ever been in one of those states? I've been there, where I've been like, God, I gave my life to this. I don't even watch Netflix, God. You can't watch. I don't even watch Amazon Prime because of the commercials. They're crazy. I can't listen to the radio because who knows what's going to come on. And God, this is what I do. I do it because I love you. But I don't have the house I want, or I'm not living where I want to live, or my kids aren't getting what so-and-so's kids gets. And God, why do they get to do what they want, live the way they want, be the way they want, say what they want, and still get all of these things given to them? You ever been in that place? God, well, come on, God. What is this? This is what I'm learning slowly. God, usually when people are gaining everything in the world, they knew what they were supposed to do, or they know the way to serve God, but they're so focused on gaining the world and look like they're receiving it. A lot of that is misplaced passion. And a lot of that is God's grace saying, I'm going to allow them to go the distance that they need to get until they realize every single thing that they have received has never satisfied the fact that it was the source of their love and happiness. And his grace is just a huge redirection of bringing them right back around to realize he is really the only source for their life. He is really the only thing that is going to be at the answer to their prayer when things fall apart. He is really the only things that could get their child through college. He's really the only things that could get them to where they're supposed to be, that they can operate in their callings, that they can move in his will. And really, he is just giving them the ability to come around to the fact that he is the real source. And to the believers like in Israel that had already found that God was their source, they start to forget it and they get shielded from the fact that he is coming, and that's really the only thing that matters, because they begin to play comparison to what they see around them. I gave this up. They're not giving it up. I'm not getting what I need. They got everything they need. And God's going, I thought I was everything you needed. I'm sad that you said that. What did I say? You said I wasn't enough. I'm trying to get all these people to get back to the point where they realize I am the only thing that matters. And I'm just protecting them in this season because I love them and giving them the opportunity to fall back into this place. But you're here and you're miserable because you're shielded by circumstance. Circumstance and comparison has become your barometer. When really, God expects me to know you are the source. You are the answer to me being seated above circumstance, so that I can see the promise. When they're going to be robbed of the message of hope, when things go down, when things get bad, they will be robbed of the message of hope, when I should be seeing it all along. That he's still coming, that he's still going to move, that he's still going to do it. Being in the center of God's will has to be the only defining factor of your life. And that's it. You have to be content in that place. In all of this, I found a reference to a story of David. And David, he goes back and he says this. When all of these things, David was a wild dude. David did stuff wrong constantly. But in David's wrong, you can study David. In David's wrong, he does not point fingers at God. It's recorded. I'm going to read the words. He does not point fingers at God and say, I expected you to do this, but you didn't, so I did this. In the middle of falling apart, David said this, oh God, search and know me and see if there be any wicked thing within me. For it was good now that I came to you. He knew who the source was. He knew if there was a problem, God was working some things out of the inside of him. Malachi's trying to tell Israel, don't look at God. Say, God, search me and know me. Show me the way to be seated in heavenly places so I can see the promise I'm heading toward. Let me not get distracted by comparison or circumstance. Let me live in your will, in your way, even if I'm not living in the fulfillment of the promise today. God, help me get there. We're thinking this is David too. Psalm 73 says this. I almost stumbled. This is David, I'm assuming. I almost stumbled because of life's circumstance, but I trusted in your presence. Read Psalm 73. It's fantastic. You go through the whole thing and the psalmist is just pity party falling apart. And then it says that he drew near to God and sat in his presence. And that became the answer to all of things. Did his whole life get better? No. But his presence was a messenger that seated him to see, you have hope for today because I'm still coming. The answers you need are still coming. I just got back from Disney, which was so neat. Me and my family, we took a trip to Disney, and we're standing there. It's Christmas night. If you've never been to Disney, they show like this crazy stuff on the castle and do fireworks. So it's Christmas night. It's 7 o'clock. The show's at 8 o'clock. We got there early to get there early. And the fireworks show, and I'm thinking, whoa, fireworks show with Mickey Mouse, Christmas night. This is about to blow our minds and my kids' minds. That's all we talked about. We're going to go to Christmas on Christmas night. We're going to stand there. There's going to be fireworks. So all of our kids know this. All of our kids know this story. So here we are. We get there at 7 o'clock. is 75 million people in front of the castle. Problem number one, I could have watched it probably on YouTube and felt the same. It was not everything. God is the source, not Disney. Found that out hardcore because it was not spectacular. It was just called spectacular. And we're standing there though, and there's a pre-show going on, like characters dancing and Goofy and whoever are hollering on stage. And I'm short. I'm not seeing this thing at all. Like I'm like, I got to stand on something. And so we're there, and some of our kids can see, some of our kids are finding a place. But then me and my brother-in-law, his 7-year-old son and my 9-year-old, who's about 7-year-old height, they don't have a clue. And I can see it on their faces that we drove all the way to Florida. Mom and Dad talked all about this show. It's Christmas night, and maybe I can hear things, but this is not special at all. I don't know nothing. I can't see nothing. And for me, I'm thinking, y'all, this ain't even the start of the show. We're an hour early. Y'all got to chill out. And in the middle of it, what Demi doesn't know is that I'm not one of those parents that goes into a park and buys things. I am so careful that I don't carry anything because I do not want to run all over a park and bump into people with Mickey Mouse and Daffy things hanging from my body. I don't want cups. I don't want popcorn buckets. I don't want none of that. I just want to run around and jump on rides and not have to store anything. I want to be free. I'm like, y'all just taking on chains. And when you get on a ride, you're going to be so burdened to what you bought, you ain't even going to be able to enjoy the ride. That'll preach for another time. So we're there. My brother-in-law, he's like the opposite. He's carrying he got Timon and Pumbaa wrapped around him. He got Mickey Mouse. He got popcorn on the right. He has 2 drinks on the left. And so I'm watching Demi, Lawson, they're standing there. And they're like, this isn't even real. Everything Mom and Dad said, everything we came for, it's not even going to happen. This is not even going to happen. Remind you, we're still an hour before the show. We hadn't even made it to the show. And I'm sitting there and I'm already planning on my moment of when I'm going to decide how long I'm going to hold Demi on my shoulders before I get too tired. So I'm trying to wait till a good spot to pull her up. And I look over at my brother-in-law and I see him. Lawson's down there and you can tell he's getting upset. And he's questioning everything. Mom and Dad said this. Disney was supposed to be this. It's Christmas night. We're not even in our living room so we could be here. And this is what, I'm going to look at people's back of their calves. This is not what I came for. This is not what Mom and Dad promised. And I look over to my right, and while he's falling apart, I see my brother-in-law start to pull everything off of his shoulders. And what Lawson doesn't know is while he's drowning in doubt, his daddy is preparing his shoulders to seat him in a place where he's going to be able to see something that is coming. And when Kendall begins to move things off of his body without even Lawson knowing, he picks him up and sets him on his shoulder. And at the same time, I grabbed Demi and I said, now is the time. And we set them both on our shoulder. And it was like everything that they had dreamed began to happen at that moment. Everything that circumstances convinced them was not coming began to happen in the moment. Now, what they don't know is when the show starts, we're an hour from the show. The promise of the spectacular has not even come. They were getting tore up before it got there. The promise has not come. Before the show starts, everybody in the park, thank God, sits down so everybody can see. So the promise of the show was coming. Their place to see what God promised and to be a part of what was going to happen was coming. And there was a place for them. And everyone sat and they could see from any angle and they enjoyed every bit of experience. But they almost did not make it until we picked them up to let them know you have made it and it is coming. You just have to be seated in another place to see that it's still going to happen. The story of Malachi is just that. Don't be shielded by circumstances and by comparison and by complaining. Be seated above in heavenly places with Christ Jesus, and hear the message of Malachi, that in every low moment there is a messenger of hope to carry you above, to see He is still on the way. Your prayers are still being answered. He is still moving things off of His shoulders to set you in a place to know, oh, I am still headed toward the miracle. I will receive what God has sent for me. If you do not feel like you received the more of 2024 yet, that's fine. God's just moving things. And today, He's moving things off of His shoulders to seat us in a place where we may not be there yet, but there it is. John the Baptist is coming. He's going to announce Jesus is here. Our whole lives are going to change. And Malachi is the word and the message that it is going to happen. Stand up with me. Malachi ends in a couple different ways. And just, I may be wrong, I don't know. This is just the way I interpret it. There's several different translations at the end of Malachi. He's talking about Jesus coming, second coming of Christ. And there's some translations that say, in the great and awful day of the Lord, in the great and terrible day of the Lord. And I'm like, whoa, God, that doesn't sound like something I need to be around for. But there's some translations that say, in the great and awesome day of the Lord. And I think when you remain in a place that is faithful and you trust God, when you feel like you're standing in a day that is awful, you're seated in a place to where you know it's awesome. And it all depends on how you get. And then it says this at the end of Malachi, coolest part of the whole thing, end of Malachi 3. It says this, and the ones that were faithful and feared the Lord, they began to speak to one another. This is verse 16. And the Lord listened to them and heard them. So a book of remembrance was then written before Him for those who feared the Lord and who meditated on His name. What does that mean? God is a God of systems. God has developed a fail-proof plan. When God gets busy, when you feel forgotten about, when you're unsure of His promise, and when all you must do is remain faithful. And then this is what it says, because of the faithful, the ones that didn't fear God, He has set a system where He cannot forget about you. Because it says when they remained faithful, in front of God's eyes appeared a book of remembrance. And on that book of remembrance was written my name, and your prayers begin to pop up, and the miracles you've asked for begin to pop up, the provision begin to pop up, and God begins to read this and goes, oh, I remember this. They're down there. They're still waiting. I must remind them in their waiting, it is still coming. And you cannot lose, even in the middle of hard times, because if you remain faithful, God will remember. And when He remembers, He will send a messenger to lift you up and show you it is not over. I am not done. Will you just let me prepare a little longer? Will you just let me set things in order? And will you remain faithful, because I am going to come through. I just need you to believe it. So for 2025, the end of 2024, whatever you haven't seen yet, whatever you're still longing for, whatever your deepest prayers are, whatever your heart cry is toward the Lord, hear Malachi today. Say, it is still on the way. It is still coming. Have hope. Have joy. Be happy today that it's going to be here soon. God has got it. You can trust Him. You can believe it. And continue the course until it comes. And in the meantime, find yourself in places that seat you in a place to see your future and not shield you from what God's trying to do in your life. Let's pray real fast. God, we thank You for the word today. We thank you for what you're doing among us and in this place, God. We just ask you that you would move, that you would just set us free from worry, God, that you would remove the yoke and burden of the unknown and not unsurety and insecurity, God. And we just pray that today and even this year to come, that you make it easy, God, for us to be seated with you in heavenly places so that we can see the promise and the reality that you are always coming and on the move. In Jesus'